Noswaith a pawb a croeso. Thanks God for the update on that. Please note that this meeting will be recorded for subsequent broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority. The public seating areas will be in view of the camera, and by entering the chamber and using the public seating area, members of the public are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings as outlined above. So, first item on the agenda, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Kevin O'Neill, Councillor Chris Barry, Councillor Lee Davis and Councillor Gareth Richards, and I should say, I'm very pleased to say, not from Councillor Ernie Goldsworthy or Councillor Paul Brown.
And it's great to see the two of you in chamber. Welcome back, Ernie. Well done, Paul. And agenda item number 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and prejudicial interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government of Finance Act 1992 relating to council tax, the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution and Members' Code of Conduct. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Agenda item number 11. I'm a committee member of the subject organisation.
Do you have any other declarations? No? And item number 3 on the agenda is a presentation, Local Democracy and Boundary Commission for Wales Electric Review. To receive a presentation by the Local Democracy and Boundary Commission for Wales. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Noswaith da, good evening. My name is Julie May, and I'm one of the 5 commissioners of the Local Democracy and Boundary Commission for Wales, and I'm the lead commissioner for the review of the electoral arrangements at Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council. I'm here with members of the Secretariat, Steve Halsall, our Chief Executive, Matthew Redmond, our Deputy Chief Executive, and Ross Evans, the Electoral Review Officer for this review. My role as the lead commissioner is to guide the Council and other interested parties through the review, to be the point of contact at the Commission for you all and for senior officers here, along with Ross, and to lead the review and the proposals through the Commission. The Commission is independent of the Welsh Government and political parties, and we report directly to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government. We are responsible for reviewing principal council electoral arrangements and administrative boundaries, and our recommendations, if accepted, will be implemented by the Welsh ministers. The purpose of our presentation today is to explain the review process, setting out the new statutory criteria and the Commission's policies. We will also describe our council size policy and how it applies to Merthyr Tydfil. We will describe how we will develop proposals and how your involvement over the 24 weeks of consultation will help shape the future arrangements for Merthyr Tydfil. We will also tell you what you can expect from us and when you're likely to receive it. As you are all aware, the Welsh Government has recently published a green paper asking local government and the people of Wales for their views on a new series of options for local government reform. A revised framework of local government is proposed, and the options consider various routes and timescales for achieving this. However, until there is an agreed view on local government reform, the Commission has to meet its legal obligations to continue with the present programme of reviews, of which this review we're discussing now is part. The Commission performs reviews in accordance with the Local Government Democracy Wales Act of 2013, and the Act states that we should conduct a 10-year programme of reviews, and that should have started in January 2014 and was due to finish in 2023. However, that was delayed because of the previous prospective changes to local government that were proposed by the previous Welsh Government. In June 2016, the Commission was asked by the Welsh Government and the then Cabinet Secretary Mark Drakeford, as part of his package of changes for local government, to conduct a programme of reviews to refresh the electoral arrangements ready for the 2022 local government elections. That programme, which as I mentioned earlier we are currently still working to, is why we are here today. We are currently now conducting the 10-year programme in under 5 years. We started in January 2017 and we're due to report to the Cabinet Secretary by the spring of 2021. And we're doing this to ensure that Welsh Government, the councils and other interested bodies have sufficient time to make the changes ready for the 2022 elections. The Commission is required to publish a policy and practice document for our programme of reviews, and you have a copy here. We published this originally in December 2013 in preparation for the 10-year programme, and we republished it in November 2016, updating it to reflect the new shorter programme. The review will propose a pattern of electoral wards for the entire council area, not just those areas where there is electoral inequality. And it might be that in some areas we propose no changes at all. We will consider every ward in detail and every ward on its own merits. We will propose the total number of councillors based on our council size policy, the number and boundaries of electoral wards, the number of councillors for each ward, and the names of those wards in Welsh and in English. It's helpful to set out the statutory criteria for the review. Section 30 of the 2013 Act sets out the considerations for the Commission in creating new arrangements, and the first of these, 1A, is that the Commission must consider electoral equality. We want to ensure as far as is possible for there to be an equal value to your vote wherever you live in Merthyr Tydfil. At present, there are differences within authorities, and it seems unfair that it is possible for 4 councillors to represent 3,609 electors, a ratio of 1 to 902, whilst 3 councillors represent 5,372 electors. That's a ratio of 1 to 1,791, and that's all within Merthyr Tydfil. The Commission considers electoral equality in 3 ways. Firstly, we will look at the existing electorate in each proposed ward, ensuring as near as may be that each ward has the same ratio of electors per councillor. Secondly, we also have regard to the 5-year projected figures that the Council has provided. And thirdly, we will also consider the difference between those on the register with those eligible to vote, and that information comes from the Office for National Statistics. This allows us to take into account any underrepresentation in an area. And in doing so, the Commission has regard to easily identifiable boundaries and the desirability not to break local ties when fixing boundaries. We describe these as community identity, and the Commission will seek to propose wards with identifiable boundaries and to minimise the breaking of local ties wherever possible. There is one other paramount and primary duty of the Commission, which is set out in the first section of Chapter 1 of the Act, and that is, when making proposals to Welsh Government, the Commission must seek to ensure effective and convenient local government. The Commission considers that to be the creation of coherent wards with common interests and good internal communication links. The number of councillors for each authority will be defined by the Commission's council size policy, and the Commission undertook a significant piece of work with colleagues in the Data Unit Wales to create, consult on and agree a council size model that we consider to be transparent and robust for each of Wales's 22 principal councils. The Commission understands that a councillor doesn't just represent the registered electors in their area, but the entire population. So in determining the overall number of councillors for a council, the Commission has utilised the total population for the area. And we have also considered where that population lives and how densely populated the council area is. Using these statistics, we have created a model with 4 categories of councils, each of these having a different population per councillor figure. These are broadly in line with the average of the existing number of electors per councillor of each of the authorities within each category. The model is not designed to reduce the number of councillors in Wales. It is designed to harmonise the number of population per councillor in each category of authority. And after calculating the number of population per councillor, we then apply two caps. Firstly, a minimum of 30 councillors for an authority and a maximum of 75. And secondly, that the level of change in each review is capped at 10%. I will now hand you over to Ross, who will take you through the implications of the review for Merthyr Tydfil.
Thank you, Julie. I'm Ross Evans and the Review Officer for the review of Merthyr Tydfil. My role is to lead the review through the Commission and to provide advice to the Commissioners. The implications on Merthyr Tydfil of the Council size policy is as follows. At the publication of our policy and practice, the Office for National Statistics estimate had the population of Merthyr Tydfil at 59,324, a population density of between 4.5 and 10 persons per hectare, and less than 40% of the population living in settlements smaller than 10,000 people. These factors place Merthyr Tydfil in Category 2. The Commission has determined that Category 2 councils should have a councillor to population ratio of 1 to 3,000, which, when applied to Merthyr Tydfil, results in the overall council size aim being 20 members. As mentioned by Julie a moment ago, we then apply the constraints of the change in members, which is capped at 10%, and reverts to the minimum number of councillors for a principal authority. The council size aim is therefore 30 for this review, 30 members. Whilst the overall council size has been determined by the overall population in Merthyr Tydfil, when considering the electoral arrangements, the Commission must use the number of electors. Currently, Merthyr Tydfil has 45,259 electors and a membership of 33. That's an average of one councillor to 1,371 electors. Applying the council policy aim of 30 councillors will result in a ratio of one councillor to 1,509 electors. It is important to note that the Commission will not rigidly apply this number of councillors in this review. If a scheme provides a greater level of electoral parity and allows the Commission to maintain community ties, it will consider varying the number of members from the stated aim. In the creation of wards to achieve 30 members, the Commission will use the communities and community wards as the primary building blocks for the wards. The 2013 Act allows the Commission to make changes to community or community wards as a consequence of creating an electoral ward. This power was specifically requested by the Commission and others following previous reviews, where the Commission was, in some instances, left with little choice in the creation of wards, particularly multi-members, when a simple ward change would have made a more appropriate solution. For example, it may be more appropriate to move a community or community ward boundary to allow for two-member wards instead of proposing one ward with 4 members. We wish to make it clear that it is not the preference for the Commission to utilise this power. We will only consider changes where we receive specific proposals that's supported by local members and the relevant community council. The Commission will not be making any changes to boundaries of its own accord. Any proposed boundary changes should be submitted in the initial consultation period to allow the Commission to make the proposals at the draft stage, as this will allow for the requisite consultation to take place on the change towards. We also wish to be clear that any changes to communities will take place as a consequence of creating new electoral wards, not to amend anomalies or small developments in the county. The appropriate place for the adjustment of community and community ward boundaries in that regard is through a community review, which uses a different section of the Act and would be led by the Council. The Commission policy is that a single member for each electoral ward provides the best democratic solution for the public and for members. However, it may be sometimes be necessary to create multi-member wards in some areas in cases supported by evidence, in order to create wards of an equal size and not break local ties. The Commission will consider the existing arrangements that an authority has and will only make changes where it considers it appropriate. It is not the intention of the Commission to artificially create single-member wards across the authority. The Commission is of the view that the maximum number of members in a multi-member ward should be 3. Larger wards may dilute accountability and cause difficulties in the administration of an election. However, we would consider wards with more than 3 members only if they exist in the existing arrangements and there is substantial evidence of local support for a ward. I'll now hand you over to Steve to explain what the Commission considers during a review.
Diolch yn fawr, Ross. I'm Steve Halsall, as Julie introduced me, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Commission. And it's my role to lead the Commission through the reviews and provide expert advice to the Commissioners, and with my Deputy Matt, ensure all the reviews are conducted efficiently, professionally and consistently. In the consideration and creation of wards, there are some issues that the Commission will consider in the representations that we received. We will consider acceptable levels of variance from the proposed county average of 1 to 1,509. Whilst ideally every ward should be, as far as practical, having the same number of electors per councillor, the reality of the nature of Merthyr Tydfil communities and the geographies means that some level of variance is inevitable. The Commission will consider a small amount of variance from the county average where community tie arguments provide sufficient evidence and justification. We'll also consider the natural boundaries for a ward, such as topography of an area, the hills and rivers, and also man-made boundaries such as major roads, railway lines, and urban-rural divides. The Commission's policy is that there should be no surprises for you when we publish our draft proposals. In light of this, we thought it useful to highlight some of particular areas of concern that there are with the existing arrangements and where we're likely to consider changes towards and potentially the surrounding areas. In front of you, there's a map of the authority with each ward colour-coded. The wards in green are within 10% of the proposed county average. The yellow areas are between 10 and 25% of the proposed county average, and those in orange are those in excess of 25% above or below the proposed county average. So the areas in orange are highly likely to change in some way. In the consideration and creation of wards, there are some areas which the Commission does not consider when we have the representations, and these include issues such as parliamentary or assembly constituency boundaries. We often get representations saying, well, you can't change that ward boundary because it's a parliamentary boundary. Well, we don't consider that. Parliamentary boundaries follow on from the work that we're doing here, and in any event, Merthyr Tydfil is in one constituency at the moment, so that should be a problem. The other thing, as Julie mentioned earlier, we are independent. We do not consider the local political implications of our proposals. Sometimes people are concerned that changes to the ward will also change their postcode or addresses. Well, that's a separate issue. Postcodes are set by the post office. The other thing that we can't do in this review is transfer wards or areas from one council to another. So unfortunately you won't be able to grab bits of other adjoining authorities, or vice versa, they won't be able to take part of Merthyr Tydfil either. The other issues that sometimes arise are polling districts. Well, polling districts actually will be changed in the light of any changes that we might make in this review. And the other thing is sometimes people are concerned about school catchment areas. Well, those are separate from the ward boundaries. It's essential that the Commission receives representations in order to make evidence-based decisions, in order to create electoral wards which reflect the wishes and the needs of the people of Merthyr Tydfil. All representations we will receive will be judged on factual evidence and not just on assertions that are quite often made in the representations. Please provide examples of local ties, such as sports groups or clubs or projects that different parts of the communities have delivered together. At the draft proposal stage, the Commission welcomes representations which both object and support our draft proposals. An issue that sometimes arises is that we make changes at the final proposal stages towards arrangements which may have been supported, but the Commission didn't have received the evidence in support of it. If you're happy with proposals, including retaining an existing ward, we need to know. When making a representation in opposition of a proposal, please take account of the statutory requirements and the Commission policies. We cannot simply retain the status quo for a ward if it is against the principle of parity. Furthermore, please provide an alternative suggestion which would improve the Commission's proposals and which you think would be acceptable, providing evidence to support it. The Council itself can help by providing a set of arrangements for the whole Council of its own making and at the earliest possible stage of the review, not simply in response to the Commission's draft proposals. We've had considerable success with other areas where this has been achieved. Consider the whole county equally, taking note of community ties, and follow the rules in the legislation, the Commission's policies, and the Council size aim. It's the Commission's view that the Council, its members, and the communities in Merthyr Tydfil know the areas much better than the Commission. And ideally, the solution for Merthyr Tydfil should come from Merthyr Tydfil. I'll now hand you over to Matthew for an overview of the timetable for the review.
Thank you, Steve. So, as Julie said, I'm Matthew Redmond. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of the Commission. And my role is to lead the programme of reviews and the review officers who undertake the reviews and ensure the reviews are all conducted efficiently, professionally, and most importantly, consistently. What you're hearing today is what we told Ceredigion in January of 2017 and we'll tell Monmouthshire in the summer of 2019 in principle. There are 5 key stages to an electoral review. The first is where with the official start, when we announce the review, we ask for proposals and representations in your area. The consultation will start on the 5th of April and will finish on the 27th of June of this year. After you've received your representations, we'll begin the second stage where we'll develop and then publish the draft proposals. We're looking to publish these early in 2019 and then there'll be a 12-week opportunity to then give us your comments on those draft proposals. The third stage is the final proposals, and that's where we take all the evidence we've received at that point, look at those, and then publish recommendations to the Cabinet Secretary for their consideration. There will be a 6-week opportunity then for you to write to the Cabinet Secretary if you have any concerns with the final proposals. The fourth stage is Welsh Government's consideration of our proposals and the representations that they've received, and they will decide how they wish to proceed. Ordinarily, they will make an order. Occasionally, they will make modifications to the order from what we have proposed. The last stage is the order coming into force, and those will be in principle at the next local government election in 2022. So I'll hand you back over to Julie.
Thank you to Ross, Steve and Matthew, and most importantly, thank you all for listening, and I'd like to thank the Chair of Bedlinog Community Council for attending this evening. We welcome your views now and are very happy to answer any questions that we can. Resounding silence.
Councillor Jacob.
Thank you. Just a personal view, really, I would welcome the proposals to harmonise the number of councillors across Wales. When we do engage with our communities as local councillors in consultations regarding performance, efficiencies, savings, regularly the comment comes up that we need to reduce the number of councillors. So I know you said it's not a reduction, it's harmonisation, but I certainly would support that review.
Thank you.
Councillor Jones?
Could I just clarify, you were talking about the initial stage, which is starting on the 5th of April. During that time, exactly who are you going to consult with? Is it within a particular frame that these are the only people you'll consult during that time? Or is it all and everybody?
It's all and everybody, but we do have a specific distribution list we do send all the information to. Obviously, you're one of our key stakeholders. Community and town councils are key stakeholders too, but we understand there's only one in Merthyr. We write to the police and crime commissioners, AMs, MPs. We go as widely as possible. We've provided you with public notices to put into libraries. There'll be copies of the information to go to libraries as well. So we want to hear from anybody and everybody. We don't propose anything at this stage, so it's down to individuals and yourselves to come up with proposals for us, or to tell us that you're happy with what you've got at the minute.
Councillor Thomas?
I second Councillor Yego's opinion on the amount of councillors. I think we have got too many, and a reduction would be useful. One of the questions I've got is, currently we have 11 wards in the borough. Could that be extended? Could we split wards? So perhaps, for example, my ward is Cyfarthfa. Could that be split into two separate entities and the council split that way? Yes,
It can. Unfortunately, we don't, because of the constricted timetable that we've had, as Ross said in the presentation, we haven't got the time, because this isn't the only review that Ross is doing, to split them ourselves. So if you wish to do that, I would suggest you speak to your elections officers, who's now going to not be very happy with me, and talk to them about where the most appropriate place to draw the line is, and where you have drawn that line, making sure that the number of electors either side still creates that parity that we're looking for. We don't want to be looking at creating new wards, but there being disparity in the new ones that are created.
And just to add to that, remember, the community interest and the community identity being key to that consideration as well.
Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You just said a consultant. We have got a lot of community groups in the borough. Would they be consulted with, or could you get the names of the group off the council?
Yeah, we're happy to consult with everybody. This is completely open. We're not hiding anything at all. So yeah, if you can provide us with the information, or the council officer can, we're more than happy to write to them and ask them for their views as well.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Mitten?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If there aren't any further questions or comments, then I'd firstly just like to add my own final comment, and that is, obviously we look forward to the consultation. Some of these ratios make for good reading, especially some of the higher ones around Treharris and Cyfarthfa and Town, etc. I only wish, you did mention the Green Paper, Julia, I only wish we were still following Mr Drakeford's local reform policy and procedure, shall we say, and I'll leave that matter at that. But no, look forward to the consultation. Many thanks to you, many thanks to Ross, to Steve and to Matthew for coming along this evening. It's warmly appreciated, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Our contact details are in the policy and practice document. Happy to help with any queries throughout the whole thing, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you for your words.
I'd just like to say thank you to Julie, Steve, Matt and Ross for that presentation. And you're free to leave now, guys, unless you want to stay. So the next item on the agenda is agenda item number 4. It's a notice of motion. It's an exemption of council tax for care leavers living in Merthyr Tydfil up to the age of 25. This is consider the attached report, which can be found on pages 5 through to 6. And Councillor Roberts has taken this one.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council notes that a 2016 report by the Children's Society found that when care leavers move into independent accommodation, they begin to manage their own budget fully for the first time. The report showed that care leavers can find this extremely challenging, and with no family to support them and insufficient financial education, are falling into debt and financial difficulty. Research from the Centre for Social Justice found that over half, 57%, of young people leaving care have difficulty managing their money and avoiding debt and leaving care when leaving care. Care leavers who were looked after by the local authority are amongst the most vulnerable groups in our community. As a corporate parent, the council should aim to keep young people safe and improve their life chances. The local authority has a duty of care to care leavers. Council resolves to exempt all care leavers living in Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council from council tax up to the age of 25. I move the motion. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder?
Second amendment, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Any comments? Councillor Barry.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. We've had a request from Councillor Chris Davis, being the Children and Young Persons Champion, who just wants to respond to the motion. So we'll pass you over to Chris.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Yeah, it gives me pleasure, obviously, as the Children and Young People's Champion. I chair the Council's Corporate Parenting Board, and Corporate Parenting Board, obviously since the elections last June, has been taking a very keen interest in this. Obviously, the independent group fully support the notice of motion before us tonight. In addition, obviously, to the Children's Society and the research from the Centre for Social Justice, obviously, the Children's Commissioner herself has taken a keen interest in this, and obviously the Commissioner, Sari Holland, has a very good relationship with Merthyr Tydfil, and her report, Hidden Ambitions, has been reported back to Corporate Parenting Board. I know other partners, Voices from Care, Bernardo's, have obviously made representation nationally and locally to this council. I think we currently obviously have provision within local council policy. We've obviously got the section 13A, which is the council tax discretionary relief policy, and Corporate Parenting Board, back at his meetings last September and again earlier this year, said that we would allow our social workers, Bernardo's, who deliver our personal advisor service, to monitor currently the numbers of young people, obviously 18 to 25, who could be eligible in the existing policy to access the relief. So we didn't bring forward a notice of motion when some of the other councillors, I think Torfaen, kicked this off. We do welcome it. I hope this isn't just going to be a political football by the Labour group. We don't see it in their manifestos coming up to 2022, because there was existing provisions, but the independent group, lead administration, fully support this. And I think what we'll do to look at the implications, how we can improve the policy, how we can improve the uptake from care leavers, is we'll look to bring, obviously subject to Councillor Barry and Councillor Hughes' support, we'll bring forward a report back to Council to make sure we've got a scheme that meets the needs of all our young people, and our duty of care across this chamber as all councillors in their duty and responsibilities as corporate parents.
Thank you for that, Councillor Davis. Do you have any further comments? No? And can we put that to the vote then, please? Thank you, everyone. That vote is now carried. And the next notice of motion is agenda item number 5, female hygiene products, and that can be found on pages 7 through to 8. Councillor Roberts again.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council notes that female hygiene products are a necessity, not a choice. Council commends the recent Rhondda Cynon Taf County Borough Council initiative to provide free sanitary products in all their schools in a bid to stamp out period poverty. Council accepts the need to help women and schoolgirls who cannot currently access or afford sanitary products and will therefore take necessary action to provide free sanitary products in schools as a first practical step to make period poverty a stigma and a thing of the past. Mr Mayor, I move the motion, and I'd like to come back before the vote is cast with a comment, if that's okay, please.
Do you want a seconder?
I'd like to second that motion, Mr Mayor, and in doing so, I'd just like to add some words in support of that. Young girls in this day and age, in this country and this county borough, should not miss school or college because they are unable to afford female hygiene products. But it is happening, and it is usually females from low-income families who are unable to pay for sanitary products. In many cases, they miss school, and this can and does affect their educational attainment and achievement. Factor in the embarrassment that many young girls and women are made to feel about this perfectly normal biological cycle. In New York, free tampons are available in all their schools. And as a councillor and school governor, they should be available in our schools for those who cannot afford them. No young girl should have to miss school, risk her health, or compromise her dignity because of menstruation. And I too also accept and implore that the policy in RCT is followed in Merthyr Tydfil. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No? Any comments? Councillor Mitten.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm equally supportive of this, but I'd also like to just point out that I'm very pleased to report that our Education Department has already been taking out an exercise with the young females in this county borough, using a pupil voice exercise that we're currently doing through the schools, working with young women across the borough to just determine what type of products they would like to see in schools to support them. And in doing so, we will have a report brought back to this council by the end of the summer. Recently, Welsh Government also sent us a receipt for some capital monies to support this type of exercise, a sum of £12,860, and the expectation is that we will match fund that then, match support that if you like, to continue supporting this and have that provision available in schools. And lastly, I'm also pleased to report that just a week ago we were in talks with the local community group who have kindly said that they would support us in providing some sanitary products for as many young women as they can within the local county borough, and so we're going to take them up on that support and also try and widen that with other community groups as well to see if they can also support our young women. So really pleased to support the motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do we have any other comments? No? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Mitten has mentioned some of the points that I'd like to raise now. I'd like to read out a brief, well, not the full written statement, but an article, brief part from the written statement from the Welsh Government. £1 million to tackle period poverty and dignity. It was written on the 23rd of March 2018 by the Leader of the House and Chief Whip, Julie James AM. It is unacceptable that some women and girls in Wales cannot afford to buy essential feminine products when they need them. I am committed to doing everything I can to tackle this inequality. Local authorities will receive £440,000 over the next 2 years to tackle period poverty in the communities where levels of deprivation are highest by providing feminine hygiene products for those women and girls most in need. Additionally, and Councillor Mitten has referred to this, additionally, £700,000 of capital funding will be made available to improve facilities and equipment in schools, ensuring that all girls and young women can access good sanitary facilities when they need them. Local authorities are best placed to know where to target effective action on tackling period poverty in their communities. which is why we're asking them to use their knowledge to identify and help those who are most in need. So I welcome the comments from Lisa that the work has already started with the Education Department. And Lisa also mentioned that I forwarded forwarded offers of some assistance, from local women's groups in Merthyr Tydfil to the leader and the deputy leader, and this support by these groups is greatly welcomed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Can we take that to the vote then, please? Thank you, everyone. That vote is now carried. And third and final notice of motion today is item number 6, Picton of Orgreave, 18th of June 1984. That can be found on pages 9 through to 10. Councillor Roberts again, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the last one from me, I promise. Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council believes that issues relating to the events at the Picton of Orgreave on the 18th of June 1984 are both of local and national importance. Minors and their families were adversely affected by the events of that day in terms of wrongful arrest, false imprisonment, ill health, family breakdown and termination of employment, and as a direct result of policing tactics at Orgreave. A full investigation into the military-style policing used on that day is long overdue, and only a full public inquiry can fully investigate this. Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council therefore calls on the Home Secretary to order a full public inquiry into the deployment and actions of the police on the 18th of June 1984 and to hold meaningful discussions with the Orgreave Truth and Justice Campaign, the NUM and concerned MPs. I move the motion. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder?
I'm delighted to second the motion, Mr. Mayor, and I've got a question as well when you open it up.
Open for questions. Councillor Carter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Can a letter be sent from the local authority which has been signed by the Chief Executive and the leader of the council to the Home Secretary in support of this motion?
There's nothing that would prevent the council doing that through officers if you direct that this evening. Whether the leader wants to do something specific of his own initiative, I'm conscious that he's not here, but perhaps that's something that can be discussed after this meeting. But in principle, I think we can agree that something can be sent.
Can I just say on behalf of the leader, because we already preempted this and had these discussions, that he would wholeheartedly support and sign that letter.
Any other questions? Just on questions, Councillor Rogers. Any further? No? Comments then. Councillor Rogers.
I fully support the notice of motion, 110% actually. But I think people should be reminded of the situation, what we were in 1984 and 85. I think I'm the only person here who was actually involved with it. I wasn't at Orgreave. What the policy they found at Orgreave was to send young men there. Because we're young men during the strike, the NUM, you could find money and food, etc. So they absolutely had nothing. I just want to remind people that this went on for 12 months. Councillor Thomas might be involved, I'm not sure. But Ernie Gold, you know about it, but I know I'm the only elected member here who's part of it, because I was out for a 12-month. But we must remind ourselves that this was one of the largest strikes since the Penryn quarries. Lord Penryn, that was nearly 2 to 3 years. That was gigantic. But I've seen people in bad state. Many, because Lord Secretary of the Trigger Combine Lodge, which we were central workshops and stores. And I must remind you as well, too, that how things happened, that we were actually picking it out, and many pits were picking it out. Many pits worked, because you would not have a national ballot. Now, don't forget that. When you ballot and you do it properly, you should have a national ballot. So I'm reminding people what happened during this time. It was a hard struggle. And that's why the young men, I repeat myself, was in Orgreave, because they could get a few bob, they get a couple of pounds, but and obviously give it up firmly. So what I would say as well is I'd like, I don't want it formally, but I'm going to say it, that should have been a public inquiry into Arthur Scargill as well, to be honest with him, I'm sure, because he took every down. He knew it was all planned. It was all stockpiled with Margaret Thatcher. That was the start of the diffusing of the unions. That was the start of it. That's that. They all planned. So it was a mad escapade, and I know that it's happened now, and I was part of it, and a good thing came out of it. My son went to university the following year. 85 he went. He was cutting wood before that down the Cumming Pant, but he went to university, so he had a full grant, so something came out of it. So I'd just like to remind people that these times wasn't all old glory and orgy, it was everywhere. I've seen men I've represented in go to meet them, you know, with shoes in half around their feet, and I'm not exaggerating. Our trousers, shirt, trying to look for people, you know. It's a hard and difficult time. And to do with that, that was all planned, obviously. It was all planned before. But I fully support it. It should be an inquiry into it, because, you know, when you're planning things, and she got away with murder, actually. So I would say this, that I support the notice of motion, but I just wanted to point a few things out to you. That being the only member you're involved in that time for the 12-month, that it wasn't all hunky-dory. It was bad times, and this was only one part of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rogers. Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to totally, absolutely second this, support this notice of motion. It's very, very timely. We've had inquiries into what happened at Bloody Sunday, Hillsborough, and I think it's high time there was one into what happened at Orgreave. As Councillor Rogers says, a lot went on there. It takes me back, actually, to my great friend, the late Bill King, and I remember once or twice he persuaded me to go down to the Merthyr Vale picket line, and I remember policemen there waving their wallets and packed lunches at some of the miners. So it was a terrible time, and for that reason I think it's high time at Orgreave, which was a particularly violent and despicable event. I truly support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. Councillor Geraint Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a former miner and from a family of miners who were directly affected by the miner strike, it was an absolute disaster of a 12-month. It was terrible. And after the strike finished and the pits were closing, I worked with some of the boys that were at Orgreave, and I've heard the stories firsthand, and it was a terrible event. And I totally support the motion.
Councillor Mitton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, you know, in some way or another, we're all connected, Councillor Rogers. I mean, you know, I'm a granddaughter of a miner sadly killed down the mine, so it always touches us in some way, if you like, because you always live through that history as well. I just want to say, really, what the original court cases pointed out was not the guilt of the accused, actually, but it was rather the failings of South Yorkshire Police. The miners' lawyers accused the police at the time of bloody, unprovoked assaults at Orgreave, and then of perjury and perverting the course of justice. In a compelling case for the prosecution, it was, according to Michael Mansfield QC, the biggest frame-up ever. Now, Orgreave has so many similarities to the unfortunate case of the Hillsborough disaster and the families who were affected at Hillsborough, where football fans were blamed there for actually what happened. And in this case, miners were blamed here for actually what happened. So I wholeheartedly support this notice of motion. We must call for this. We must support it. And as I've already said, we will sign that letter.
Thank you. Councillor Jones. Dow Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to correct Councillor Rogers. I was actually working in Merthyr Vale Colliery when this happened. And yeah, he's right, it was a very difficult year for everyone concerned. And there were many things went on that really need to be looked at. Some of the things you saw, I was on the picket lines, and some of the things you saw were very, they just need to be looked at in depth. Thank you.
Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't go over some of the comments that have been made, but I entirely agree with Councillor Mitton in the statement that she's made. I was a trade union branch secretary at the time, and the whole trade union movement were under attack for the whole period and afterwards and before it. But the one thing that we should not forget is no one's saying that the police force had a job to do. But we heard via the NUM and other trade unionists the fact that, particularly at Orgreave, there were members of the armed forces who had uniforms put on them. And this was a fact which wasn't doubted anywhere except from the police. And the important part of this motion is the third paragraph down, and that is a full investigation into the military-style policing used on that day is long overdue, and a full public inquiry can fully investigate the matter. Now, there have been attempts, Mr. Mayor, over the years to get this inquiry up and running. It's got connotations of the Hillsborough disaster, where they finally got their say as to what happened many decades later. But this motion deserves to be supported, and I'm glad to hear from Councillor Mitten that hopefully there'll be a letter sent by the leader and the Chief Executive. And I'm being prompted by the other Councillor Jones here, and the fact that there were no epaulets on their uniforms was the outstanding factor, that they weren't police there. And as it says in the motions, families were affected. Many of the miners suffered ill health for many years afterwards. There were many miners who were wrongfully arrested, and we should ensure that this never, ever happens again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lewis.
Further to members' comments, which obviously I support, I think it shouldn't be forgotten that the same police force, South Yorkshire Police, were involved in this sad episode, as indeed the Hillsborough disaster, and that is indeed no coincidence.
Do we have any other further comments? Councillor Roberts.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if there are no further comments, I'd just like to thank Council this evening for supporting not just this motion, but all three motions raised this evening. Thank you.
And can we take this motion to the vote then, please? Thank you, everyone. That vote is unanimously carried. Next item on the agenda is agenda item number 7, is minutes of the previous meetings. To approve as accurate the minutes of the following meetings from 7A through to 7H. And I understand Councillor Mitten's taking this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, just to approve the minutes from agenda item number 7 through to 7H.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
Can we put that straight to the vote then, please? Thank you, everyone. They've been carried. Next item on the agenda item number 8, Member Champion Responsibilities. To consider the report of the Chief Executive. This can be found on pages through 39 through to 52. And Councillor Andrew Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Member Champion Responsibilities. A full council on the 27th of September. There was a determination to examine the role of member champions. The opportunity to rationalise, monitor, support, examine the accountability and post, as importantly, to communicate with the public and other partner organisations. The good work being carried out by the members across this chamber. The list of current champions is set out in table 5, pages 41 to 42, with the associated paperwork in support of these roles, accountabilities, feedback, reporting template and external reports, are in the appendices. There's only one amendment I'd like to bring to your attention, which is in Table 5, and that's that Geraint Thomas be replaced by Councillor Kevin Gibbs as the homeless champion. I move. I'm sorry, recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. I move.
Do we have a seconder?
Yes, I second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions? Any comments? No? We put that straight to the vote then, please. Thank you. That vote has been carried. Next item on the agenda, item number 9, objection and appeals subcommittee amendment to consider the report of the Chief Executive, which can be found on pages 53 through to 56. And Councillor Andrew Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The objections appeal subcommittee amendment. First of all, the objections and appeals subcommittee currently hear appeals in relation to the refusal of door control licences. This is no longer a function of the council, but is now dealt with by the Security Industry Authority, the SIA. Subsequently, subparagraph 3.56E needs to be revoked. Secondly, subsection 3.56A to D require the objections and appeals subcommittee to have delegated authority to only either uphold or refuse an objection. It is not under the remit of the objection and appeals subcommittee to overturn or make suggestions with regard to any substantive decision that's already made. There are some amendments to the report. Page 53, 1.2 of the report reads 3.0606E and it should read 3.0506E. Also on page 53, 2.1, 3.0606E should read 3.506E. And on page 54, 2.3, 3.0606 A to D should read 3.506 A to D. Okay. I'll take you to the recommendations, which are 2.1 to 2.3. I want to move the three recommendations, but because of the complexity of this report, we want to put an additional recommendation in, which would be subject to scrutiny. We will approve this report to the appropriate scrutiny committee. I move.
I second, Mr Mayor.
Do we have any questions? No questions? Councillor Jones.
A bit late. I read the report, Mr Mayor, but can someone tell me specifically the actual reasons why we're referring this to the appeals subcommittee? Because having sat on there recently, there are only 3 members on that subcommittee, which I think is a small number to deal with some of the meaty items that are in this report.
Simply as I understand it, to obtain parity with other objections which are referred through to that committee. That's what that committee exists for. It was established by council so that it could deal with objections, and it deals with other objections, so it's just to obtain parity so that objections as listed there would go to the same committee.
Any further questions? No? Move on to comments. Do you have any comments? Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. There's not enough detail in the report for the Labour Group to support the recommendations set at 2.1 on page 53, 2.2 and 2.3 on page 54. I welcome Councillor Barry's new recommendation for this to go to scrutiny, because I was going to make an amendment for that to happen. So we can't vote to support those recommendations, but we will make a recommendation for it to go to scrutiny and then come back to council after it's been seen by scrutiny, the relevant scrutiny committee. Thank you.
So can we just be clear then, if the recommendations are put forward on the basis that Councillor Barry has suggested, so that the wordings would be prefixed with the words subject to approval by the relevant scrutiny committees, then those recommendations, are you able then to support it?
Suggesting a different amendment, Carys, if that's okay, that we'll vote down those recommendations and then have the amendment for it to go to scrutiny first and then come back to full council.
Right, so you are suggesting an amendment which will need to be voted on, and if that's the case, can you tell me what your amendment is? Because I'm just a little bit unclear as to what your amendment is if it's not the amendment that Councillor Barry has made to his own recommendation. Are you recommending, therefore, that we don't vote on the rest of it at all, and that all that is voted on is that this whole thing is referred to scrutiny?
Correct.
So in that case, members, you are voting on an amendment that you simply refer this report to scrutiny, the relevant scrutiny committee. I'm not absolutely sure which one we would be talking about, but refer to the relevant scrutiny committee for a further report to come back following that consideration.
Can I just ask for clarification on that? Because I think that's the same thing, actually. So, but I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, and you'll have to tell me. But I wonder whether I could share some additional information to support my colleagues, because I think it was a difficult report to understand, and I had further clarification on that today, which could help Councillor Jones's question, perhaps Councillor Roberts's queries. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that or not, though perhaps under observations.
I think I share the slight confusion, but I think what it is that Councillor Roberts is saying is that he doesn't want the report considered at all here now. He simply wants it referred to a scrutiny committee to be considered. So what we need to do is have any questions that there are about that amendment which has now been approved, subject to it being seconded. So is there a seconder for that amendment?
I'd second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. On the basis that that's seconded, then we will take questions, Mr. Mayor, in respect of the amendment, and members will need to consider the amendment.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have my hand up. I was just going to say, are we really, what we're doing is deleting recommendations 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and just voting on Councillor Barry's effectively 2.4, which is we are deleting those points in the recommendation, aren't we? Is that Councillor Roberts? Is that what you're saying? You're deleting those recommendations, aren't you?
Okay, do we have any questions on the amendment, please? No questions?
I suppose, why can't the Objections and Appeals Subcommittee, why does it need to go to scrutiny? I take on board there are 3 members. That's how that committee's been set up. For parity, it's cross-party, cross-council. That should be the place where this should go. I don't see why it needs to go to scrutiny and then go to the Appeals Committee, really.
Perhaps it's an opportune moment for me to answer that query now, because it isn't in layman's terms. And not, with all due respect to our legal colleagues, God bless you, because a lot of it isn't in layman's terms. I just think it's an opportunity to clarify really what this subcommittee will actually be looking at. And I can do that because, of course, the wonderful word playing field came up in this report. So as you can imagine, I had an immense interest in it. It is an internal agreement. For instance, if we used a playing field that we are all aware of, to move from the Education Department to the Estates Department, so that outline planning permission can be had, let's just say, we wanted to build a road on that field and use a proportion of that field, let's just say, for access to a school, let's just say. So what this will actually allow that committee to look at is, when you sat on that committee, can we move that field out of Education's remit into Estates remit? And it's an internal agreement. It wouldn't look at any planning appeals, planning objections or anything. They would still follow the normal planning process. Just wanted to clarify that, because that's what clarification I needed today. I don't know if that helps members or not.
Do we have any other questions on the Councillor Rogers?
Because I take it what it is. What we're going to vote on the amendment is that the whole report goes to scrutiny, then it comes back after scrutiny to this council, and then we discuss it. Is that correct? That's all right? Oh, sorry.
What would happen is, if you support the amendment, then all you will do is refer this report to scrutiny. Scrutiny will consider it. Scrutiny will then decide whether it comes back to council. So it's not definitely going to come back to council. Scrutiny may say, no, it's not. So that's the point of it going to scrutiny. But yeah, that's all you're voting on right at the moment, because now we're dealing with the amendment.
The
yeah?
whole report, not dissect it, the whole report.
No, the whole report, yeah?
Any other questions?
Just an observation.
We're still on questions at the moment, Councillor Jones. 1 second. Do we have any final questions? No? Comments then. Councillor Jones.
Of Andrew's presentation, you could see that there were a lot of confusions being altered as we went along. It's C and not this, and that. What we are saying is that so that we are seen to be open and transparent, which is what this is all about, going to scrutiny, that we send the report to scrutiny, which will be considered in its entirety, and then it'll come back here. It could very well be at scrutiny that the 3 recommendations that Andrew have flagged up, there'd be no issue with them. No issue. But on the other hand, there may be something that people haven't thought about at this point in time. That's where scrutiny comes into its own.
Do you have any other comments? No further comments? Oh, Councillor Clive Jones.
Well, to add to the comments made by Councillor Harvey Jones, I mean, if this goes to the scrutiny committee, I'm bearing in mind, Mr. Mayor, that this was put together by the legal department. They may, for example, set up a task and finish group to go through this in detail from end to end, come back with a recommendation to the scrutiny committee before they come back here.
Okay, can we put that to the vote then, please? Councillor Jones seconded. Just to clarify, we are voting just on the amendment.
On the amendment. You are voting. No, sorry. Can I just be clear? Can I just be clear so that everybody understands? You are voting on an amendment which has been put forward by Councillor Roberts, that this report is deferred to a scrutiny committee. You are not voting on this report. Councillor Skinner? Yeah? You are voting on the amendment, which is that this report is deferred to a scrutiny committee. So you are not voting as to whether the recommendations are enacted. You are voting on an amendment which takes it away from here to a scrutiny committee. If that amendment is passed, then you will not consider this report further this evening. If it is not passed, you will go on and consider whether you support the recommendations of this report. Is that clear?
And moving swiftly on, the next item on the agenda is item number 10, Statement of Wellbeing and Focus on the Future, Wellbeing in our Community, to consider the report of the Deputy Chief Executive. That can be found on pages 57 through to 110. Councillor Barry.
Doesn't get any easier, does it? This report explains the changes to the approaches of the council in delivering services, and the key focuses across the 4 chief officers for the council to meet the duty under the Wellbeing Future Generations Act 2015. 2 appendices, the Statement of Wellbeing, and Focus on the Future, Wellbeing in our Community, set out the changes we have made based on our experiences from our first year applying the Act. These documents replace the old corporate plan approach. To summarise, we have streamlined our processes to focus on 4 objectives instead of 9. We felt we were spreading ourselves too thin with 9 objectives, and will have greater impact focusing on 4. The new objectives combine key elements of the initial 9. This means there will be 1 objective under each theme, and therefore each chief officer will be responsible to delivering it. It should be noted that we have not lost emphasis from the initial involvement and engagement with our community. When streamlining the objectives, we have made sure that the outcomes from the exercise remain the 4 updated objectives. This report has recently been challenged at governance scrutiny, and I would like to thank that group for their input. We have taken on board the comments from the group within the report, and as such, I'd like to move the recommendation.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And do we have any questions? Councillor Jago.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a query on the new Focus on the Future document. If we could start on page 71, this refers to the Statement of Wellbeing for 1819, item 4.3. On page 71. This refers to improving early years as being crucial in tackling the root causes of adverse childhood experiences and the detrimental impact on future health and well-being. So a fundamental key statement that the local authority, I think, needs to make sure is reinforced in all of its policies and procedures and plans moving forward. However, this pertinent statement seems to be omitted from the Focus on Future document on the same Best Start objective on page 97. So when you go to page 97, it's exactly the same Best Start objective, but this pertinent statement has been omitted, and I just wanted to know why, really. The Focus on Our Future document is our local plan up to 2022, and not to make reference to early years support, focus around ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, I think that should be crucial under the Best Start objectives, and it could be detrimental to how we intend to achieve our wellbeing objectives, in addition to the everyday work we carry out as a local authority. So I just wanted to ask that question, first of all.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Jago. In carrying out the review of the objectives, we tried not to create duplication. So because Chris Hole and the community development comes under the social services arena, we've covered the tackling poverty and the ACEs objective under the living well objective. But obviously that wasn't something we considered, that people would see it as a gap in Best Start. So obviously if you feel that we can certainly review it. But what we didn't want is that potentially you'd have officers go into 2 different scrutinies. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And lots of the objectives will be cross-cutting over the 4 main objectives, but I think it's pertinent to early years. Best Start in life is around that early intervention, that support, that maternal support that it talks about, nurturing the home environment, preschool and school education, and I think it sits very pertinently within that section. And I, for one, would like to see it in there, just in case people who are looking at specific sections don't see that it's already in a different element, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? No further questions?
So can I just make an amendment to reflect that within the document?
Yeah, I think the officer
This
is
will
just
be taken-
agreeing to do it. You don't need to move anything. The officer will just make that amendment.
If there's no further questions, we'll move on to comments, please. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Obviously, as Children and Young People's Champion, I echo what Councillor Jago said, and I welcome, obviously, the Chief Officer for Social Services, her response about the cross-cutting themes. But if we could add that early years, Lisa, in, that would be great. I obviously made representation at governance scrutiny about, in the beginning of developing this policy, there was considerable engagement with members and community groups. But obviously in the update, and I welcome the streamlining, obviously bringing the objectives down, scrutiny was getting a lot of duplication. They were coming to the individual scrutiny committees, and then all of the reports come into governance and taking up a considerable amount of, elected members, officer and co-opted members' time. We'll see how this beds in and how obviously the monitoring of it goes over the next 12 months. But disappointing thing for me, and I've obviously made this point to Governance Scrutiny Committee, was the lack of involvement. The key projects under each of the 4 objectives were, in my view, predominantly led by officers of this council, and there was limited engagement with the chairs, the vice chairs and members of scrutiny committees. So if that could be noted, I know Andrew knows my comments, but Ellis obviously is the lead for this as the Deputy Chief Exec. There needs to be considerable engagement with the members and not just the officers of this council taking this forward.
Yeah, okay, we'll take that on board, and we'll ensure we endeavour to engage with.
Councillor Skinner.
Could I just say in response to that as well that I've arranged to meet with Andrew, and we're going to take that forward. So.
Any further comments? No. And can we take that to the vote then, please? Thank you. That motion's been carried. We're now on to agenda item number 11. Item number 11 is the Biffa Community Awards. To consider report of the Chief Officer Community Regeneration can be found on pages 111 through to 112. Councillor Geraint Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's great to see the local councillors supporting local sport. Absolutely fantastic. Some of the report is said early 1.1 is to seek the council's instructions on the allocation of funds from the Plymouth Electoral Division. The recommendations that in 2.1 a council of the Electoral Division has declared an interest, and under the council's constitution, where such an occurrence happens, it is necessary for the whole council to confirm or otherwise the allocation of these funds. I so move.
Seconding, happy to support it.
Do we have any questions on this one?
I don't normally do this. Councillor Dave Jarrett did this years ago. He was superb at it. If I'm wrong, I see a mistake on the bottom paragraph, last but one. You're going to give the title of documents as Aberfan, but it's actually Abercanide it should be. So I don't know the money went down there. You'll be all out on getting it. So can I move correction on that? That it's Abercanide Wanderers, not Aberfan Wanderers. I think I'm correct.
On the iPads, it's Abercanide Wanderers. Yeah.
On the title of the documents that are exhibited as background papers, there's actually a reference to Aberfan. So Councillor Rogers has been Hawkeye and has spotted that for you. Can I just be clear on what you're moving? Because the recommendation says that you approve or otherwise the allocation of funds. So can we say that you are recommending the approval of the allocation of funds so that everybody knows what they're voting on?
Yes, that's what I'm recommending.
Do we have any other questions? Any other questions? No? Any comments? Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, just sure that Aberfan Wanderers will be very disappointed by this decision.
And if you've got no further comments, could we take that to the vote, please?
Councillor Bill Smith, please.
Thank you, everyone. That vote's been carried. Next item on the agenda is agenda item number 12 is an information report. This is the annual equality report for 2016-17 from the Deputy Chief Executive, and they can be found on pages 113 through to 174. Item number 13, to deal with any other urgent business or correspondence, Councillor Dye-Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. As some of you will be aware, Kevin Davis, head of the engineering department, left the authority last week. And as is traditional, I'd just like to say a few words. I always found Kevin to be a very committed officer, going far beyond his job description. And though when I was Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services, we had many warm debates, they were always conducted cordially. His knowledge and experience will be badly missed, though I have every confidence in Karen Morris, his successor. And I'm sure that you will join me in thanking Kevin for his excellent service and wishing him a long and healthy retirement with his wife, Wendy. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Item number 14, to receive communications from His Worship the Mayor. There are none. So, diolch yn fawr, everyone. Meeting ended.